The Holy Gospel is written in the 13th chapter, St. Luke, beginning at the 10th verse. Now Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath, and just then there appeared a woman with a spirit that had been crippled her for 18 years. She was bent over and was quite unable to stand up straight. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said, "Woman, you are set free from your ailment." When he laid his hands on her, immediately she stood up straight and began praising God. But the leader of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had cured on the Sabbath, kept saying to the crowd, "There are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and not on the Sabbath day." But the Lord answered him and said, "You hypocrites, does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or the donkey from the manger and lead it away to give it water? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 years, be set free from bondage on the Sabbath day?" When he said this, all the opponents were put to shame, and the entire crowd was rejoicing at all the wonderful things that he was doing. Here ends the gospel for the day. Please be seated. I'm just curious. I got to know the answer to this. How many of you as adults know the story of potato chips? One person. The legendary Cab Calloway, the great jazz musician, played at a place called Birdland. And in one of his acts, he introduced a new man by the name of Charlie Parker. And Charlie Parker played a really remarkable concert. But after the concert was over, one of the self-appointed critics in the audience came up and said in front of Charlie Parker and Cab Calloway, said, "You ain't so hot a player. You'll never be any better than Charlie Parker." At which point Cab Calloway gave this critic his saxophone and said, "Here, sir, you play like Charlie Parker." The well-known columnist Thomas Kilpatrick probably did what many of us have done. Well, I haven't, but I know some people who have bought a computer program that helps you in writing and teaches you form and style, correct pronunciation, correct capitalization, correct phrasing. And it does also a spell check. And I know they're helpful in writing, but this man, who is a very well-known columnist in a newspaper, bought one of these computer programs, and he decided to buy one that not only did all these things, but told him whether it was a good writing or not. And the program, after it had analyzed his writing, his one that he put in the newspaper today, it said, "You are a fairly inadequate writer. You really need to go and take some training." So then he decided to put some other writings to the test. And one of the things that he did was put in Lincoln's Gettysburg Address to see how this program would rate the Gettysburg Address. It made the analysis and said the style was weak, too much spoken in the passive, wordy, too many adjectives, too many multiple clauses. This person could do well to write more simply and more precise. As Yogi Berra has said, well, those people who are so popular are bound to be disliked. Why is it that so often when people excel or achieve or do something positive in society or in the church, they come under such astute criticism from others? Things done in for the right purpose and in the right way. There are many texts that I come to the church with that I don't want to deal with sometimes. But this is one that is absolutely fascinating and fantastic, because it says something very often that is really destructive for the church. Jesus comes to a group of people and he's talking to them and lecturing them, and a woman comes in who's crippled and has been crippled for 18 years. Now she comes in to the temple to worship. And Jesus looks with her on compassion, and he heals her of this illness that she's had for 18 years. And said the poor woman has been plagued by evil for 18 years, and he heals her. And you would think that immediately those people who were the most astute religious people would applaud this and really sanctify him as some kind of hero. But the chief of the Pharisees comes to Jesus and he's very indignant. Not only to him, but to the woman. He says, "You know Jewish law. What in the world are you doing this on the Sabbath for? If you want to be healed, there's 6 days that you can come and be healed. Why do you have to come on the Sabbath? And what kind of a teacher, what kind of a rabbi are you that would heal this woman and purposely break one of the sanctified rules of the Jewish church?" And Jesus said, "Well, of course, you're hypocrites. You know that you do things on Sunday. You lead your animals and feed them. There's some things you just have to do. And isn't the work of the grace of God more important than a bunch of rules?" It seems so obvious. It seems so obvious that this was a good thing. Why would anybody criticize it for any reason whatsoever? But I've got to tell you that one of the things I think that detracts more people from the church than anything else is some people's fascination with rules. Rules that were never put there by God. Rules that really have no sanctification in themselves, but simply feel that they need to be bound to in order to live some kind of exemplary life. Okay, we're not saying that rules aren't important. We need some kind of guidance. Nobody would involve themselves in any kind of contest in athletic skills if there weren't rules. Out of bounds, way to score, penalties. You need order. And you do need order in the church. But sometimes the rules become more sanctified than the grace of God Himself. And so many of the rules that we see today in churches and the arguments that you have between churches that divide denominations are simply rules that were created by mankind and not by God at all. Jesus was a rule observer. He sanctified the practices in the Jewish church. But there were times that rules had to be set aside for something greater. Whether it was the healing on the Sabbath, or eating with sinners that he was not allowed to eat with, or talking to women who he was not permitted by Jewish law as a rabbi to do in public. Can you imagine those rules standing up under any kind of intelligent scrutiny today? And yet we fight over rules. I guess the extreme of this was in the early Puritan church. If you remember the early settlement of Jamestown, those of you who are history buffs, people were required to go to church. That was the rule. Absolutely. And the violations are this. If you missed one Sunday, your rations were cut off for a full day. You didn't eat. And if you missed the second time, you were flogged in public with a whip. And the third one was 6 months in stocks during the day in a public square to show your shame for not attending the worship on a Sabbath. The author who wrote about these rules said, "We have no record of anybody missing church more than 3 times in a year." Seems like a good rule, doesn't it? We absolutely insist that you go to church. We put down some laws to ensure it, and you destroy the church. I remember coming in to the second parish that I was a part of. And I don't know why it is, but the Altar Guild seems to be usually a group that very much is going by the rules, and anybody that violates the rules gets cut down. But I came to this church on a Saturday afternoon, and there was one lonely woman in the front pew that was crying outrageously. I asked her, "What in the world is wrong?" And she said, "Oh, you have no idea how badly I've been bawled out." And I said, "What on earth for? And who did it?" Well, she said, "The president just got after me so badly because I had put flowers higher than the cross. You know, it is part of protocol that nothing exceeds the height of the cross." And she continued to cry and said, "I don't know, I guess I'm going to have to leave." And I said, "Well, I don't think that's necessary. We've got to deal with this situation." I said, "What are our alternatives?" And she said, "I don't know what it is. I just don't have any idea." I said, "Well, let's just sit down and consider the possibilities, the things you could do." And she said, "Oh, I think I would like that." And I said, "Well," and remember, I'm young then. I learned a few things since that time. But I said, "Well, I guess, in an extremes thing, if you want to do something really extreme, you could tell her to go to hell." And she looked at me and her eyes grew big and she said, "Oh, Pastor, am I able to do that?" And I said it was one of the options. I was hoping it wasn't one of the options that you would readily agree to, because it probably then would make you as guilty as she is for doing what she did. But how many times we've gotten upset about the way something is situated, or some kind of rule that we have as far as joining membership or doing some kind of protocol. And I understand rules are important, but sometimes we get so involved in rules that we forget that somebody came to Jesus and said, "What is the most important rule in the Torah? Which one of these 632 rules really outweigh all the rest?" And Jesus said, "Well, that is simple. You love the God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself, and then all the rest of the things will take care of themselves." One of the things, if we learn something really critical this morning, is that when people are striving to do something for other people, and they do it in good faith, and they work in the church and do good things, the effect is much more important than the rule. And that's the message Jesus was trying to teach his apostles that day. You don't let people suffer an extra day because it's the Sabbath. And I will observe the Sabbath as regularly as anybody, but this overrides it on this day. We all live in a world where structure is necessary. where we need to teach others the rules that we live by and observe as courtesy, but also as necessary for to keep an orderly society. But let's not get so involved in rules that we rule out the caring and the loving of individuals. The lesson for the day. Amen.